There is no such thing as a trans child. Gender affirming care is a sham, a massive money grab, and is not trauma informed. It's chemical and physical mutilation instead of root cause treatment. And then I said, borders should be secure and illegals deported. Every country has the right to determine who is allowed in or not. There's nothing evil about removing people who shouldn't be here because they snuck in the window instead of coming through the door. Deportation action isn't causing harm, it's righting a wrong. This is a consequence to the poor choice made by thinking they were above immigration law. Words are not violence. When you shut down ideas that you don't agree with, you are being the fascist. It says sexual assault survivors and all women deserve their spaces to be free from biological men who have sexual fetishes, who happen to be wearing dresses and lipstick. And I said, sincerely, a sane clinician practicing with a full caseload of every type of person you can imagine, who are being healed in the process instead of being fed BS about perpetual victimhood and powerlessness because of systemic oppression.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm Ryan Rogers. Joining me today is a therapist from Nebraska, Holli. We met at the recent AMP conference, and I'm excited to be reunited with you on this podcast. So welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here and see you again.
So starting off, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from.
Yeah, so I'm an independent mental health practitioner in Nebraska. I've been in the field about 14 years. I have a private practice on my own that I've had for about 5 years now after working in community mental health, day treatment center, and then also I worked for a large health system prior to opening my private practice.
Very cool, very cool. And when did you go to grad school?
So I went later in life. So I started, I guess I went back to go undergrad straight through grad school around 2007, finished up in 2013 with my graduate program.
Gotcha. And that was like a clinical mental health counseling program?
Clinical
ACA?
clinical counseling master's. Yeah.
Gotcha. What was your experience in grad school? Do you think it prepared you well for being a therapist?
I loved my graduate program. I think back then, and also just the school that I went to, they just did a really good job, preparing us, giving us an idea of what to expect in the field. But I do think I learned way more just on the job. They do what they can to prepare you, but through supervision and just doing the work, I think is where I learned the most. But my program definitely, I feel like was a fair representation of what to expect. I had wonderful professors.
Mm, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you feel like it was good at preparing you for like the skills and techniques and kind of theories that you need to know to be a therapist.
Yeah, I did.
Did you notice like politics being injected into therapy at that time or the education?
Back then I didn't feel like it was heavily biased, which I'm so grateful for. I know some of the people coming into the field now are reporting something quite different, but I didn't feel that at all. In fact, the undergrad program at the college, I went to Bellevue University, and the undergrad required, in order to graduate with any undergraduate degree, you had to pass this series of courses that really were like American civics, which I thought was just super valuable, just to kind of go over the founding. And, I remember specifically one of the questions being like, do you think the founders, what do you think the founders would think of our country now?
Mm.
And where we've moved from since then. And I don't know, it was very thought provoking work, and I really enjoyed that.
Very interesting. Wow. Yeah, I've interviewed over 100 mental health professionals on this podcast, and it's so interesting because almost everyone who graduated from their grad program more than 10 years ago has very positive things to say about it. They thought that there was not a huge bias, that they were well trained and prepared to be a therapist. People who have graduated in the last 5 years especially have a completely different story to tell.
Mm.
So have you noticed something change in the therapy profession during that time period?
Well, I mean, yes, definitely. There's so much polarity, I guess, in just our day-to-day lives. I mean, if you think about it, 10 years ago, people weren't fighting online about politics like they are now. And it's so, you're either on that side or you're on this side. And if you're not on my side, you're my enemy, you're wrong, and any list of names that they'll like call you, assuming so much about your intent and who you are as a person and your character, really. That's a huge change in just, I think, society in general. And then in our field, I mean, anymore, there's so many voices out there that I guess are saying, even you probably shouldn't be a therapist if you have this set of values.
Yeah, I see that quite a lot. That if you're a conservative or Republican, a Donald Trump supporter, anything in that line of thought, or even if you're not super vocally progressive, you should not be a therapist because you don't hold the right values, and because of that, you're incapable of helping people. You
Mm.
see that perspective.
Oh yes, very much so. And I'll take it a step further. Like you said, like even a moderate person who doesn't view themselves as political at all, that's viewed as complicity, they'll say. And oh well, you're part of the oppressive system if you're not radically speaking out against it.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the meme, "Sir, this is a Wendy's." But it's like, I came here for my anxiety or my mental health. Well, why are we talking about ICE and therapy? Why are we talking about nonstop about Donald Trump? What does that have to do with mental health issues?
Right, and sometimes it does, because this just the world we're living in right now is there's so much just and media is really good at this, and part of it is they want to sensationalize everything because that's what gets clicks. That's what gets people drawn into whatever it is. And so depending on where we get our news, it can really cause I have seen a lot of just anxiety about, wow, this world, I don't even want to have kids, or I don't even want to leave my house because what if this and this, just feeding that, um just that hysteria almost.
How do you deal with that if a client comes in and says, yeah, I'm super upset about ICE and Donald Trump, and maybe I should leave the country, maybe should not have kids? How do you deal with people who come to you with that kind of thing?
Well, like anyone else, I'm gonna start with curiosity. I'm just gonna lean into what's going on that's causing you to have these feelings. And our job at the very core is to challenge maladaptive beliefs and behaviors that are getting in our own way. And so I'm gonna start with curiosity. I'm certainly not gonna be like, well, you should think this way about it. But I'll start with curiosity. I'll just lean into what's feeding this? Where are you getting these ideas from? And then kind of parse it out from there, and go through, like, hey, I'm kind of a solution focused. I lean heavy on that. And so what would that look like? Kind of go down that road with them and be like, well, where would you go? And what do you know about that place? And,
Mm.
you know, like anything else, when you know someone is stuck, you're gonna help them kind of sort through it in a way that helps them hopefully get on the other side of it feeling a little bit more empowered. Like, hey, you know what? There are things I can do, and I have clients from all walks of life. I certainly have people who don't align with me politically, and my job isn't to get them to see the things the way that I see them. My job is to help them, cope effectively within the world they're living in. And so sometimes that's, well, what are ways you can get involved? Encouraging, healthy ways to engage in that discourse by, maybe volunteering for, causes that are close to your heart and that really mean a lot to you. Things like that.
That's interesting because, you identify as a conservative.
I do.
Yeah, so you're conservative, and rather than kind of chiding someone who comes with these type of ideas, you'd almost encourage them more to lean more into it.
Well, certainly, it's not my job to change their mind and their value set and how they view politics. That's the furthest thing from my job. And I think some are missing that and deciding that some ideas are just problematic. And we just need to call them out. And if you voted for, Donald Trump, then Trump, then you're automatically problematic and have problematic thinking that maybe needs to be um, confronted in the session, and that's not my job. I certainly had plenty of clients who voted differently than I did, and again, not my job to challenge that and tell them all the good things I think that conservatives do and all of those principles that I think are important and valid and make sense to me. That's not my role.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So I haven't noticed anything too scary from you so far. Why do you think that there's so many people in these like therapist Facebook groups, for instance, that say people like you should not be allowed to be a therapist?
Well, I think they automatically assume that I can't be compassionate, that I don't care about immigrants, that I don't care about different socioeconomic challenges that people have, or whatever. Just a lot of assumptions are made about who I am, and they couldn't be further from the truth. I love people. That's why I became a counselor. I more than anything, I just want to help people, you know, live their best life that they can, and I think it all boils down to assumptions, which can get us all in trouble.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't remember if I asked you this. Is there an area of like specialty or expertise that you have?
Actually, yes. So I work a lot with trauma. So I do a lot of work with sexual trauma, childhood trauma. I've done some work with combat PTSD. Um, and on the flip side of that, I also run a sex offender program. So um, that tests my ability, I think, to be compassionate, because here I have people who my scope is very narrow. I only see people who have offended against children or who have been adjudicated for having child sex abuse materials in their possession. So I think it takes a lot of compassion to meet someone like that where they are and help them make a way forward to live a life that's free from harming others, of course, and also satisfying for them.
That's so interesting. I come from the background working in drug addiction treatment centers, and I thought I've seen it all, I've heard it all. I have the ability to be compassionate, empathetic towards anybody, and then you kind of get into working more in the field, and you start work with murderers, rapists, pedophiles, people who beat their wives, and you think, gosh, how can I be empathetic and compassionate to this person who I don't understand how they could have done that? And I think the conclusion that I've come to is it's actually more important for me to help some of these people because there's more on the line if they were to not get healthy.
It's true. And it's so fulfilling when I can be part of this individual creating no more victims in society, having no more people that he or she have hurt in their lives, and I get to play a small role in that. Of course, they have to buy in, they have to be willing to do the work in order to grow and get better and progress. But I get to play a small role in making society safer, and that is super rewarding.
Mm. How, I'm wondering if there's some way that this type of therapy project around helping those type of offenders and make society safer, if that plays into like a broader part of your politics.
Well, you just don't have to look very far to just see tragedy everywhere. Um, People are always hurting other people, and that's just a sad part of our world. Um, and so I don't know how it directly correlates with my politics, but I'm heavy on the justice side of things. I want people to serve their time and be you know they have to go through whatever justice side of things needs to happen for sure. I see people pre-trial sometimes and then sometimes post-conviction, so after they've served their time as well. Sometimes I go into the jail and do um, interviews as they're awaiting sentencing, things like that. But I'm not here to just go straight to, okay, how do we make a great life? Part of that is looking back and saying, how'd you get here? What what steps in your life have led you down this path where you were even capable of hurting someone else in this way? And that's the hard part often for them, because sometimes they're like, well, I'm done with prison or whatever, and I'm ready to move on with my life. And it's like, well, we could do that, but we run the risk of getting ourselves back in these same factors of risk that you were in before, that tripped you up, that you didn't necessarily know or plan that you were going to be going down this path, but these things in your life could repeat. And I do think there is a component that's important here, that correlates with maybe a more conservative mindset, and that is sometimes these ideas on the progressive side is, well, we're all just sort of victims to this systemic oppression, right? And wow, what do we do with that? Okay, say that's true. Now what? What are we going to do about it? Is there anything we can do, or are we just going to sit here and just stay stuck because, well, I'm this is my skin color and therefore I'm perpetually oppressed? Part of what I do in the sex offender work is when we look back and we really pay attention to what were those risk factors that led to your offending. These aren't excuses for your offense behavior, but they are explanations for some of the behaviors, and they don't let you off the hook. But the great thing about doing that is that if someone's like, well, this just happened to me. I was just chatting online with someone who I thought was of age. Turns out they weren't. We sent pictures back and forth. Now I have child sex abuse materials on my computer. Now I'm on a sex offender registry, and my life is blown up, right? Well, if it just happened to you the first time, and we don't really dig into where you stepped out of line and what sort of safeguards you didn't have in place, well, then that's a very powerless place to be, because then it can
Mm.
just happen to you again. And I don't know anybody who wants to go back to prison or wants to be charged again in something like this. And so I really like to dig into okay, well, you can say that it just happened to you, but man, I'd be really worried that it could happen to you again.
That's so interesting that you put it that way. William Glasser, who came up with reality therapy, which is where I got the name for this podcast, he has this concept of, if you focus on what you can control, that's how you can make progress in your life. Like that becomes empowering. And when you think of so much of the social justice messaging, it's, you're a victim of the system and there's nothing you can really do to control it outside of completely overthrowing the system. But you're talking about, like, by focusing on what is in your area of control, that's a very empowering message. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I come at that from that angle all the time, because that's, you're not going to change what your husband does or doesn't do. When talking to someone who's frustrated in their marriage or in any sort of relationship, you don't have power over that person or what they say, do, think about you, their perceptions necessarily. Your power and control is, how do I speak to this person? How do I relate to them? How do I make sure I'm doing what I can to meet their needs in the relationship, in a healthy way? That's so much more empowering, because we all own a piece of how our relationships go in one way or another. And it's so you're so powerless when you try to control others and how they think and feel.
Mm.
You're not going to go anywhere with that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you used a minute ago, you used the word justice. And that's one of the words in this phrase, social justice, that we hear so much. But you're
Right.
using it in a very different way, because kind of the assumption with a lot of social justice is, with the crime and punishment stuff, you have to be very lenient. We want more people out of jail and prison. We want more lenient sentences. And you're saying that there's actually some type of compassion in sentencing people. Is that right?
Well, certainly, I'm always going to want to protect children. I mean, I think we all should as a society. Our most vulnerable deserve protection. And if someone hurts a child or anyone else, there needs to be justice. There needs to be some sort of penalty for that behavior. And that's not to say that we can't have compassion for that person and try to work with them at some point to move forward in a way that's healthy. But I think of, not to shift too much, but, people talking about it's so cruel that we're deporting people in our country. Well, I can have compassion for someone in the way that, well, that will feel disruptive for their life if they're, sent back to their country of origin, or they're separated from family members that maybe are here, and have obtained citizenship. I can lean into how that would be sad and disruptive for them. I can also, on the other side of that, understand, man, we're a country of laws. Every country has borders. Every country has immigration rules that you have to abide by in order to be in their country. Whenever I travel, we have to fill out paperwork if we, go to a different country, and kind of let them know how long are we here. And there's limits to that, and that's just part of um, a civil society, really. And we have so many people who have been impacted negatively by people here illegally and haven't felt like there's been justice. Whether it's these horrible situations where we see these women, certainly raped and murdered. That's terrible, horrible. We had a young woman here in the Omaha area killed by a drunk driver who then fled the country. He was here illegally. Just horrible situations for these families. And then, less horrific, but still super disruptive to lives we had, I think it was a meatpacking plant or something that was raided for immigration customs enforcement. And they had just a long list of people that were using other credentials like social security numbers to work illegally. And so that's the identity theft side of things, that it takes months, maybe years, for these people to clean up their credit or whatever it is. They can't file their tax return because someone else already filed the tax return for the company they're working for illegally. It's just so many messes. And I have compassion for those people whose lives were disruptive, and they're just here living their lives as citizens. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And I feel like the way it's framed so often is this is like a racist issue. The only reason you would oppose unlimited immigration is you must be just like profoundly depraved and racist in your heart or something. And the reality is, I think it was a majority of Hispanic voters voted for Donald Trump in the last election.
Oh, is that
And
right?
I have so many friends from Mexico. I'm in Texas here, so we have a lot of people from Mexico here. My friend Ricardo, who grew up in Mexico, he was like, I came here the right way and I did things legally. I don't understand like why you have to protect people who are not doing things the right way.
Certainly. And there are people still in line waiting
Mm.
for their citizenship and their hearings. And the process, I 100% agree with those who think that we need to reform it, because I do want to reward people who are coming here and doing it the right way, and contributing to our society, which we all know people who, I think anyway, I know several people who are immigrants, not all from Hispanic countries, some are, but people from all over the world that want to come here because there is great opportunity here, and they want to be Americans. They want to be part of our United States and contribute and just live their lives and help their families have the best experience they can. That's wonderful. And I think it's safe to say we're one of the most generous countries in the world when it comes to taking immigrants and allowing people to come here. And I feel for people who are doing it the right way, and people are cutting in line and just bucking the whole system. I don't think that's fair.
There's a huge elephant in the room, this question that I feel like doesn't get asked very much, but really deserves to be kind of at the forefront of this immigration discussion. And that is, if America is such a horrible dystopian hellhole of racist oppression and just nonstop bigotry and prejudice, why are so many people beating down our doors to come here?
Makes no sense.
Yeah.
Talking out both sides of their mouth. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people who are saying they want to leave, and they say it, but I don't know that they ever do.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these celebrities who, for like the past, 5 elections or however many, "Well, if we lose, I'm going to Canada." They're still here.
Right. Well,
So,
Canada has immigration laws too.
yeah.
So good luck with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I want to go back to trauma for a second. Can you tell me what your understanding of trauma is and what the best way to treat it is?
So I'm an EMDR practitioner, so that quite a mixture of, CBT, which some people hate, but I find really, really helpful sometimes. A lot of solution focused kind of ideas. And then the mind body connection that we address with EMDR is really extraordinary and has been so healing for so many people that I've worked with. I trained in EMDR. I was so fortunate. I was working at a nonprofit. The training would have been out of my price range to be able to afford making that kind of money at a small community or a community health center. But they had a grant from the EMDR, EMDRIA. And so we were all able to be trained for free. And I thought, oh, this is some weird voodoo, like Jedi mind tricks. I didn't really buy in to the idea, to be honest. I'm sitting there and I don't know if you're familiar, but when
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
training, you're actually using your fingers and your arm
yeah.
gets tired. But um, I brought it back to my practice, and I just started seeing an individual with really complex compound just trauma from toddler through teens, just over and over again, sexual trauma, horrible, horrible story, and got started working on each of those memories. And it was so rewarding to see just in real time this person uh, be dealing just day to day. I mean, this is someone who was hospitalized over and over, lots of suicidal ideation, just really tough, tough life. And as the healing was taking place, these triggers were just not impacting this person anymore. And that is so rewarding to have somebody who would previously have a panic attack if they saw a certain type of vehicle driving down the road because they were assaulted in that type of vehicle, or, just different things like that, to be able to be like, oh, you know what, that's not bothering me anymore. And so EMDR, I think, is really cool for that. So trauma is definitely a term that's overused in our society. I think people, say things are trauma that aren't necessarily, maybe a clinical uh, representation of what trauma is. But the way I describe it when I'm talking about EMDR to people and trauma, if you have a memory in your past that is you're stuck in, and it sometimes feels like you're still reliving it, you have kind of body sensations that go along with it, and also negative beliefs about yourself in relationship to that memory. Yeah, that's something to explore.
So a couple things. One, I was one of those people who heard about EMDR. I'm like, this is some woo-woo nonsense. You know what I mean? Like, you're moving fingers back and forth, and then there's all different. They've developed a number of different type of techniques with EMDR. My
Mhm.
supervisor has like buzzing hand things that go back and forth between your hands, all kinds of different stuff, and you think like, this is what is going on here? But first of all, there's extremely robust research supporting EMDR. And second of all, I've heard so many stories from people with trauma where it almost seems like a form of magic how well it works. And I will get hopefully certified in EMDR later this year through my work. So I'm really excited about
Oh,
that.
wow. That's exciting. It's a great
Um,
opportunity.
yeah, I'm really excited. Other thing is, yeah, just well, I've gotten in a number of debates on this podcast about what is trauma, and you know, is it about the event, the response, or both? Because there's, traditionally classified, it was like something life threatening essentially, or watching another person die, like a specific, very extreme events. And it's kind of broadened to some degree. And there's certain things where I think like people say I'm traumatized when I see Donald Trump on TV. Well, they might be having a high distress response, but I don't know if that's like in the same category as trauma. Is that any of that make sense?
I agree. And so often I'll explain it in this way. It's like your body's sounding the alarm, like there's danger, but there's no fire. There's no danger. There's probably some disturbance. And so I think a lot of what I work on is, hey, let's get to the point where you can tolerate some discomfort in your life,
Yeah.
where you don't just cower and curl up in a ball because somebody disagreed with you about something, or had feedback on your job performance, or um, whatever it is. You just to have that resiliency to say, hey, I can tolerate discomfort. I can, use skills maybe taught to me in therapy. I can kind of monitor, what am I saying to myself about this? And so often it's something, very catastrophic, like, oh, they told me this thing about myself, so that means I'm terrible at my job, or Donald Trump is the president, so now it's just a fascist country. Just very catastrophic thinking patterns that I think we can address.
Mm. What do you think of, this is one that I debate with a lot of people, this idea that everyone has trauma?
I don't agree with that.
So I think amongst proponents of this, they would say that there's big T trauma, like what you and I would traditionally think of as trauma, and they would say little T trauma is just kind of the not inconveniences, but kind of the discomforts of everyday life to kind of build up over time. That kind of all the little T's eventually kind of accumulate into a big T. Does that resonate at all?
I've heard people talk about it like that. I think it does a disservice to people who really have a hard time. I'm thinking of my dad, actually, who's no longer with us. He passed away on Biden's inauguration night, which we of course miss him terribly, but we sort of had a joke about, well, he just said, I can't deal with this, so I'm out of here. But I think of my dad, and of all the people in the world, he would have been one that could have really heavily leaned into, victimhood stance. And poor me, I have so much trauma. He was born with cerebral palsy, just had so many, surgeries growing up as a kid. He was in a body cast. I don't even know for how long I don't know, early adolescence or something like that. Just, all these siblings that are running around and doing what they want to do. And he could never do any of that. He is someone who never let it hold him back, and was someone who always just kind of had a smile on his face. He had a lot of faith in the Lord, and just figured out, hey, what can I do? I've got these limitations with my body. I'm not ever going to be able to run or throw like a perfect spiral football or whatever it is. But man, I've got this brain. And he ended up having a great career in the construction field for his whole entire life. And that's someone who I think could have very easily been like, oh, I'm disabled. And he could have qualified for 100% disability with no problems at all. But he wasn't somebody who ever wanted to have anything handed to him. He wanted to work for what he had. He took a lot of pride in his ability to support his family, and just to be a really smart guy who served a lot. He served his church well, he served his family well, and always wanted to be a provider. And if anybody could have used the trauma word, it would have been him. And he would be laughing right now, because he'd be like, oh yeah, no, not me. I don't have trauma.
I love how you presented that. I think I have people like Jake Friedman, who's on this podcast a lot, had active combat in Afghanistan, or people that I know who are sexual assault survivors. And then to have someone say, well, my boss scolded me for the work that I turned in, or, I saw Donald Trump on the TV, and, this is trauma. It's all kind of in the same category. It just cheapens it so much. And I would think should be offensive to people who have like a real claim to that word.
Absolutely agree.
So, let me see, where was I going next? Oh, yes, your infamous Facebook post. Will you tell us about that?
I was doxxed today. Oh, well, yeah, sure. I'll be glad to read it for you. Let me find it. If I can find it here. Sorry, I had it here. You know how sometimes you open something and then it just automatically reloads even though you didn't
Oh,
want it to?
believe me, I know. Yeah.
So annoying. Okay. Here. Sorry. Yeah, I did have it ready. Okay, here we go. This was in response to someone on one of the many forums we're part of on social media, where typically several times a day, a more liberal or leftist therapist or professional will put something out that basically demonizes us in some way. Okay, and this was my response to her. I can be snarky sometimes. That may not surprise you, but I said, what would we do without leftist clinicians policing our speech and beliefs? And so I said, have fun with this. And just basically listed off with asterisks here. There is no such thing as a trans child. Gender affirming care is a sham, a massive money grab, and is not trauma informed. It's chemical and physical mutilation instead of root cause treatment. And then I said, borders should be secure and illegals deported. Every country has the right to determine who is allowed in or not. There's nothing evil about removing people who shouldn't be here because they snuck in the window instead of coming through the door. Deportation action isn't causing harm, it's righting a wrong. This is a consequence to the poor choice made by thinking they were above immigration law. They did so knowing that deportation is a very real possibility. If I visit another country, I'm required to obtain the proper documents in order to be there. This is true of every nation. And then I said, government is not the answer to every social problem. Words are not violence. When you shut down ideas that you don't agree with, you are being the fascist. I said, sexual assault survivors and all women deserve their spaces to be free from biological men who have sexual fetishes, who happen to be wearing dresses and lipstick. And I said, sincerely, a sane clinician practicing with a full caseload of every type of person you can imagine, who are being healed in the process instead of being fed BS about perpetual victimhood and powerlessness because of systemic oppression. I make plenty of money without perpetuating ideas which keep people sick. None of the garbage you are all spouting helps people get better. I said, well, maybe that's your angle. If everyone is powerless to oppression, it keeps them dependent on therapy to exist. It's gross, especially for people who want to talk about ethics all the time. They throw out ethical, ethics requirements for most of the time. It's for social workers, which I'm not, but they really like to use the ethical code against us at times. But I don't think they always think about things from all different perspectives.
Yeah. So the first thing that stands out to me is nowhere in that post did you say anything hateful. You didn't say trans people are freaks or I hate immigrants, or it was nothing that the way that they paint you as some prejudiced, bigoted person who just is a heart full of hate. What you kind of outlined is a pretty mainstream conservative position. I would say on each of those items, probably on each of them, a majority of Americans hold that position. But what they would say is holding those positions makes you illegitimate as a therapist and you should lose your license. Like, explain that to me.
Yeah. Well, what we're dealing with is, you're talking about society as a whole. And, whatever it is, 78 million people voted for Donald Trump. I don't like everything he says or does. Okay. But man, his stuff aligns most closely anyway to what I believe. And so society as a whole, I think there's a lot of us who are more moderate or conservative in these general kind of social ideas. Okay. But when you're talking about therapists, we are definitely the minority by a lot. And so I think there's some security in that for them to just be able to call out anything that opposes their viewpoint as being problematic. You shouldn't be licensed. You shouldn't be able to meet people in therapy and help them. And it's absurd. We know that to be true because we know several of us, and we all deeply care about people and want to just help them find the solutions for their lives and be the best version of themselves that they can be. That doesn't have those don't have to be at odds with one another.
Is there some natural reason why you think progressives are so heavily overrepresented in therapy? I feel like something like pastoral counseling is like very similar to therapy in a lot of ways. And I would think conservatives would be much more heavily represented over there. But for some reason, it's almost assumed that therapy is a progressive profession.
Oh man, I've got to think that, and I'm again so grateful that I went to school and graduated when I did, because back then it wasn't, they weren't telling us that therapy is political. At least they weren't in my program. And that is the overarching theme of so many of these posts. Therapy is political, and you're voting against the interests of vulnerable populations when you vote conservative. And so I've got to think that it's coming from academia, which shouldn't surprise any of us when we look and see who's leading the charge there. These are people who, they just see the world in an entirely different way than we do. And if those are the people that are educating the future therapists and social workers, no wonder we're in this predicament.
Mm. It's so wild how much this is, because this is not just random people on social media who make these comments. This is like my professors in grad school thought exactly like those people that you're talking about. Um, and in some ways, even the ACA, APA, National Association of Social Work, a lot of it's encoded. This is how you're supposed to be a therapist, to value social justice and to believe that therapy is innately political. You know, I don't know if I have a question here, but just like how do we get to this point where it's so saturated with progressive ideology?
Yeah, I'm at a loss with that, and I'm also just at a loss of how we fix it, other than just really being good clinicians and supporting one another and finding our voice. Because what I think what's really been cool is in some of these forums, I haven't always spoken up. I've lurked before, but once I started making posts like I did today, I've made a lot of connections. And I think so many of us feel very isolated, and like I know in our jobs we do. I know I did. In the community mental health uh agency I was working for, they were this was a while back, but they were distributing ally sticker, rainbow ally LGBTQ like stickers that we could put on our door at our community health agency. And I was just kind of like puzzled by that. Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we looking for these just ways to divide and really just, I don't know, is our sexuality really the most interesting thing about us that we have to have like a sticker? And I've served many clients of different sexualities, and at no point did me not having an ally sticker on my door impact my ability to meet them where they are and help them with whatever they're dealing with. And things like that I think just kind of, I don't know, hyper separate us, if that's even a term I can use.
Yeah, there's this kind of pervasive mentality amongst progressives, and you definitely see this in the therapy profession. Whatever is most important to me in this moment must be most important to you in this moment also. So if
Mm,
it's the pride thing and the rainbow different flag stuff, or if it's Black Lives Matter or whatever, the Me Too thing, like this is the most important thing to me right now in this moment, and it must be most important to you. And tomorrow when it's something new, you have to change with me.
right. We're gonna have new ribbons
Yeah.
next week. New a
Yeah.
new cause. I haven't changed who I am or what I do. Uh, the only way that I do that is just to meet the individual needs of a client.
Mm, wow. Have you run into a lot of other politicization of therapy outside of online, like in CUs or anything like that?
Oh, I'm so guarded in what I do now and where I spend my money. I'm not part of any associations that don't align with my values. I'm not going to give them my money anymore to stay a member. And I really do guard myself with, if I'm going to spend money on a CEU, I'm not going to go and listen to something that I don't align with, and it's not going to help me ultimately. If I'm going to be sitting and learning about something, I want it to be valid for what I'm doing in my practice. And if that's, I've thought about taking some other trainings for like accelerated resolution therapy or maybe brain spotting or something like that. That interests me. Uh, and it's possible that even going to those, that there will be tones of that intersectionality nonsense, I'll say, in those trainings. But I'm pretty careful.
Yeah, I've done a handful of CEUs, and I read a ton of therapy books. Um, and depending, there's some good CEUs. We had some good ones at the AMP conference.
We did.
But pretty much every therapy book that I read, most of them have nothing to do with multiculturalism and social justice. It's like, here's how to do CBT. But all of them have like a chapter on multiculturalism and social justice that is just like awkwardly jammed in there that has nothing to do with the rest of the material. It's basically, if you were to boil it down, it's like, oh, and by the way, vote blue.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think just actually the whole multicultural competency idea is it's pretty short-sighted in my view. Certainly, there are maybe stereotypes that might sometimes be true about people, but man, I don't care. I'm not going to start there. I'm going to I'm going to start with whoever's in front of me. I'm going to be curious. What are your needs? And if there is some sort of cultural uh, component that's valid for session, well, tell me how that's important to you. Tell me how that's impacted your life. You know, no two families are going to be exactly the same. No two siblings have the exact same experience growing up in the same family. So why would we think that this person, this is a Black female, therefore she must have this experience. It's absurd to think that we can put these labels on people and then have any sort of semblance of, I know what their experience is because of that. I took that multicultural class however long ago, and I just think it's a sham because we can't, they love to use the terms lived experience, right? We
Yeah.
can't assume someone's lived experience based on their socioeconomic status, the color of their skin, where they grew up. Like none of that is going to be a copy and paste for anyone. And I another side of this that I think is so intriguing, and it doesn't make any sense because they push this idea of multicultural competence, but at the same time, I'm sure you're seeing it too. If you're part of any therapist groups in your town, it's becoming increasingly more popular to decide my therapist has to have exactly my same sexual preference, gender. Uh, you know, they have to be a certain color, which, you know, what? That in other words, I want someone with exactly my same intersectionality boxes checked, and that's who I want to go see for therapy. Do you think, I mean, doesn't that fly in the face of this whole idea that multicultural competence is so important when it doesn't matter? We're just going to be an
Yeah.
echo chamber of our own thoughts and experiences anyway if we're only looking for, you know, you know what I'm
There's
saying.
there's like a certain type of understanding of therapy is the whole point is to try to get a different perspective. And there's a certain type of like navel gazing narcissism of I basically want to see myself in another human body, but just exactly like me. And there's therapists who do this as well. I would talk to people in graduate school like, well, I want to specifically work with first generation immigrants who were first in their family to go to college and
Mhm.
LGBTQ. I'm like, that's so specific. You're just talking about yourself, you know?
That's exactly what it is. It's so specific. I don't want to be challenged. I want you to echo back whatever I want to hear. I'm hoping that you're going to affirm whatever it is I'm coming in with, whatever that is, which that right there is just asinine to think about because, man, somebody comes in with high levels of paranoia or, suicidality. Again, like, are we just going to be, oh, well, yeah, you know what? You're right. You probably should kill yourself because your situation is so terrible. Of course not. We're never going to do that. Uh, we're not going to feed into paranoia. I also, I think of people who work in the eating disorder space, and boy, we would never affirm somebody who's 80 pounds and they're like, you know what, I really want some liposuction. Like, what? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to help them work through their dysphoria in a way that they can start to accept their body in a way that's healthy.
Yeah, I feel like the most obvious version of that is the trans thing of, validating something that's obviously false. You're not a woman born in a man's body or vice versa. Like
Right.
you are the body you're born into. It's not like a shell that we got wrong by accident or something. So it's false, and all the treatments are harmful. We're going to pump you full of unnatural hormones and we're going to do surgeries on healthy organs.
Mm.
None of that it makes any sense, but this is like the common wisdom in our profession.
It is, but I think it's starting. I think it's
Yes.
starting to shift. I'm so grateful for the recent I think it was a huge payout to one
Yeah.
person who I think she had her healthy breast removed as a teen, and
Yeah.
boy, it's horrifying and it's so sad. And we certainly enjoyed hearing from a couple of detransitioners at our conference, and
Yeah.
it was just they were so brave to come and talk about their experience. And I think we're going to see more of that, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that these people have been so deceived, and I gotta think there's just gonna be a huge wave of more and more lawsuits. And boy, I feel for these people so much. And I it's not trauma informed. I put it in my post. It's not trauma informed to say, yeah, let's put you on puberty blockers and not talk about, well, what is it that makes you so uncomfortable with your biological sex? There's something to that, and I think it bears some attention. And that is an incredibly provocative statement, what I just said.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I work in the field of addiction, and you would never say to somebody, well, you think heroin is nutritious and that's your truth, so I'm going to validate that.
Right, right,
But for some reason, this is like a holy and sacred category that you're not allowed to question.
right. And that's our job. That's our whole job.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, it's frustrating that, you know, it's it's almost like a religious orthodoxy where it's like there's certain things that the normal rules of therapy apply, like an 80-pound anorexic or a drug addict or this or that. But for some reason, certain categories like the race thing or transgender, it's in this whole different category that like
Right.
operates under different rules. Evidence doesn't apply over here.
Right. And on the flip side, as we think of just, feeling like people are looking for their own demographic for a therapist. On the other side, we've also seen clinicians, different medical professionals say, well, if you voted this way or if you think this way, you don't deserve any sort of treatment. Or even
Yeah.
even worse, there's been some recent cases where people are actually encouraging harm to someone who thinks differently than you from a political standpoint. Or, yeah, if you're a Trumper or a Charlie Kirk fan, you're not allowed in this clinic. We're not going to treat those people. Which again, just from our side of things, absurd. There's no litmus test for entering into my office to, well, how did you vote? I'm certainly not going to see anybody who voted for Kamala Harris. I mean, that's just silly.
There's certain times when I think not wanting to work with someone is legitimate. I'm
Sure.
thinking of I worked at a treatment center where a female clinician who was a sexual assault survivor did not want to work with a convicted rapist. And in my mind, that's totally legitimate. But they're essentially treating like over half of Americans as though they're rapists, like more like the moral equivalent of that.
Oh, for sure. Because everything we believe is problematic.
Yeah, man. So I got two questions left for you. And the first one is should be an easy one for you. How do we fix the therapy profession?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's just so easy. Got
It's a
your notepad
softball.
ready? Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. Um, well, I do think that if we can be brave, if we can be vocal, um, with kindness, with the understanding that, hey, we can communicate with others and we can understand one another better. I think that's a good place to start. Uh, I think for the longest time we weren't speaking out at all, so they just assumed we didn't exist. And now that there's I don't know, I think Charlie Kirk's murder really did something. I know it did in me. I'm just like, I'm done, like, even trying to hide. Not that I was hiding necessarily, but I'm just going to be my authentic self. The Lord's going to take care of me and honor what if I'm trying to help people and using ethical practice and evidence-based modalities, and just being that kind person I've been all these years. That's I'm going to be okay. So kind of not operating in fear anymore, which I think there's more of us that are starting to speak up. Just doing good work, I think, is really really our best bet. I don't know how do we fix academia. You're gonna have to ask somebody smarter than I am about that. I have no idea.
Mm. So, you mentioned there's more of us standing up and speaking up, which is awesome. But it still feels like a very David and Goliath thing. They still control the major institutions and they control academia and they're the majority therapists. Do you feel like there's somewhat of a tide shift, a changing tide in therapy?
I don't know if I'd go as far to say that. I think we're on the right track with, specifically the gender transition stuff. I think we're starting to. I think the vast majority, again, not talking about therapists, but society as a whole. I think most people are okay with saying, "Hold on." When it comes to kids, we gotta press the brakes here. And let's take a closer look at this. For the longest time, we've been jumping in both feet, like Europe did several years ago, and then they came around to being like, "Whoa, this is not so great long term." We're just now starting to realize that, and so I'm hoping that'll shift. Um, I really do. I don't think the ideological tide is necessarily turning in our favor. I don't know that it ever will, but that's okay. I'm gonna meet clients where they are, one at a time, and do my very best work with them. Uh, Most of them don't even know where I stand politically, and that's really the way it should be. My own beliefs and who I voted for is so irrelevant in the therapy space. It couldn't be more irrelevant.
When you get in these online forums and you are sitting grad school and you look at a lot of the stuff put out by the ACA, APA, all those, it sounds like politics is the main thing that you're always going to be focusing on. But if you actually are sitting with a client or in a group therapy, you're talking about anxiety and relationships and how work's going. Like politics rarely comes up, but they make it like it's the most pressing issue.
It's true. And it does come up sometimes, but, you know, it's like anything else in our lives that feels really overwhelming and big and huge. And some of it we don't control. Okay. I've got my one vote and I'm going to use it. I'm going to vote. I vote in the midterms. I vote in local, races, and I vote in national elections. I do some volunteering for campaigns that I really want to do. But that's the limit to what I can do. And I think it's really helpful for people to recognize, okay, when I'm really ruminating and just obsessing almost about what's going on in Washington, D.C., or even for us right now with Minneapolis, so many people are just so distraught by this. And, when there's human suffering, certainly, there's a part of us that are like, oh man, this is heavy, this is hard. That's where we lean into, okay, let's talk about where is your power, what can you do, and then what are the things that you need to maybe set off to the side and say, okay, I don't have the capacity to change this or deal with this in the capacity that I'm kind of ruminating over it. And that's gonna be true of so many problems that we face. Politics is just one.
I love that answer. My final question for you is when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about
Mm,
more?
okay. Well, we already covered it in one, and that is the overuse of the term trauma.
Mm.
We've got, we I just we've covered that one. I think that so many people on social media, I think of TikTok, which I'm not. I don't even think I'm on TikTok anymore. I had one for a while, but a lot of self-diagnosis is happening, and so um, there, the DSM. That's probably a whole other podcast about how we feel about the DSM-5. But I think people are so eager almost to have a diagnosis, and um, sometimes that can be helpful. Hey, if I get tested, I'm on the autism spectrum, and that helps me understand how my brain works and how there might be some communication barriers. And because I know that about myself, I can now get the specific types of therapies that are going to help me be the most successful I can. That's one that I think is sometimes helpful for people. Is it overdiagnosed? Maybe. Another one is, those self-diagnoses of, well, that's my OCD because I like things neat. Or, oh, the borderline personality disorder thing. I feel like that was a trend where I'm labeling myself with this. And it's almost, it seems anyway, as a license for maladaptive behaviors. Well, I can't help it. I have borderline personality disorder, and it's
Mm.
like, whoa. Mm, I don't know about that. I think that we need to increase our ability to tolerate discomfort, be able to look closely at ourselves and understand, okay, what are my blind spots? And, maybe I've got an anger issue that I need to address. And that, man, I can fly off the handle. And that's something for me to work on. Tolerating discomfort, uh, increasing our capability in our lives to manage things without therapy eventually, with that being the
Mm.
ultimate goal, not to
Mm.
be in therapy forever. Um, I don't know. Did I answer that?
Yeah, there's one that I wanted to pick out about just how people like internalize their diagnosis.
Mm.
And it seems like there's a sense of meaning and purpose that comes from owning this diagnosis, but there's also kind of a form of social capital of I'm someone with OCD or borderline or what have you.
Right, and I have a therapist who's,
Mm. It's like a shaman or something.
right, like yeah, we're this all-knowing, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with that. Another thing that I was thinking of, that I think we don't talk enough about is, I think generally in society, and especially in the therapy world, I think there is this kind of emasculating thing that goes on where, okay, we got to really dig into our feelings, and which, sometimes, yeah, but therapy doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be emasculating. I see several men, not solely in my sex offender work, but outside of that as well. And I really enjoy helping them identify, their own sort of where they fit in like this masculine. We've heard of masculinity being toxic, which is that's a whole other thing, but I just think that couldn't be further from the truth, because I view masculinity as being protective and valuable and important in all societies to have, strong masculine men. And I think there's probably a fear sometimes of it, especially for a man, maybe a man going to see a female therapist for sure. Oh man, what is this going to be like? Is this just going to all be like, navel gazing and talking about my feelings, and I'm going to have to cry in a pillow or whatever? But, uh, it doesn't have to be that way. And I really enjoy, kind of putting that out there at the beginning, like, hey, you did a really hard thing, a really difficult thing by making an appointment with a stranger, and you're coming here to sit and talk about stuff that's maybe difficult to talk about. I really like helping people, first of all, feel comfortable and okay with it, and then kind of dig into what's important to them.
I love all of that answer. There's a lot that you gave me there, and that's some really good stuff. So, Holly, thank you so much for joining me. I loved getting to have this conversation, and would
Thank
talk
you.
to you again anytime.
Thank you so much.